Recording started.
Good afternoon, and welcome to this, the 7th in a series of 8 web conferences, Reaching Every Learner, Differentiating Instruction in Theory and Practice. This afternoon session is based on the article by Dr. Bob Gable and Dr. Silvana Watson, Using Knowledge of Student Cognition to Differentiate Instruction. I'm going to let both Dr. Gable and Dr. Watson introduce themselves. They've created slides so you can get a sense of who they are. But I'm going to ask everyone who's in attendance this afternoon if you would join me in a virtual round of applause and welcome Dr. Robert Gable and Dr. Silvana Watson. So if you can click on the clapping hands there, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Gable and Dr. Watson.
Good afternoon. This is Bob Gable, and you have me at a disadvantage since this is my first experience in this kind of media. So you'll have to bear with me when I perhaps slip and don't click the proper button.
And this is me, Silvana Watson, and this is also my first webinar, and we hope to be able to answer your questions and add to the information that we already have provided.
One of the things that we thought we would do is frame our discussion around several initial introductory points, the first of which is, how does learning occur?
And so as you think about learning, you need to think about, how the student encodes that message that you gave them. And so how the student determines what, when, and how he or she is going to get that information in order for that to become learning. Learning is a process and requires many cognitive skills, and in order for them to be able to learn, those skills must be working. It must be working. It must be in good shape.
And not surprisingly, there are certainly some differences among students with regard to their encoding ability and their ability to sort through and distinguish relevant from irrelevant information, and their ability to use their working memory and to maximize the use of working memory.
Just one thing here, if you look at the second definition or the second statement about how learning occurs, it says learning must be organized in a meaningful way. And so if we think about that, this is going to be our job, to organize information and make it meaningful so that learning can occur in our students.
The next slide highlights two related aspects of the learning process. One has to do with attention, and as we just alluded to, attention has to do with encoding information in support of working memory, and then working memory is required for learning because that is where we manipulate information, and that is where students interact with regard to their working memory and then long-term memory, which ultimately allows students to store information for later retrieval.
Memory, we're very lucky that we have our memories distributed through our brain, so that if we have brain damage, I hope we don't, but if we do, we're not going to lose all memory. So we have short-term memory, working memory, and long-term memory. Long-term memory also is divided into exotic memory and semantic memory. And again, all these memories, these types of memories are distributed throughout the brain.
And just as an aside, it may seem to be a bit removed from the challenges that teachers face on a day-to-day basis, but it is integral to the decision-making process and making decisions about how best to meet the diverse needs of a classroom of learners.
Attention is one of the cognitive processes very important for learning, because if the child is not receiving, not paying attention to the information, so that information is going to be lost, even though working memory is working, but attention did not take the information to working memory, so that means that learning is not going to occur. So it's a very important cognitive process for learning.
And there are various factors that can limit a student's already existing limited capacity to attend to and to grasp significant aspects of instruction.
So as I said earlier, we have a memory system, and that memory system is composed of 3 types of memory: short-term memory, working memory, and long-term memory. We will concentrate on working memory, although we'll be talking about short-term memory and long-term memory, because they work although they are individual types of memory, they work together. And working memory being the mediator between short and long-term memory in certain tasks.
As Silvana suggested, there are differences between working memory and short-term memory. They both relate to the storage and the manipulation of information, and then serve a functional role in the complex process of the overall cognition.
So one thing you need to understand is that because when you read, you see a lot of times that working memory is under short-term memory, and they're both short-term memory because they are not long-term memory. So, but working memory has one more thing to do than short-term memory. It stores and manipulates that information, which is one step more than short-term memory.
And so as Silvana suggested, the process of remembering, it falls both under short-term memory and then working memory, and both are prerequisite to storing information and being able to manipulate it successfully and to store it then into long-term memory, where for all intents and purposes it will remain indefinitely.
Now let's talk about working memory. And working memory is that memory that holds and manipulates the information. It's like a sketch pad that, where we write our information. It's that ability that we have of looking at the present and trying to retrieve what we've learned in the past and making that connection. So if I was going to provide another definition of learning about in using working memory, I would say that learning is making connections. So sometimes we say, well, there's no way I'm going to know as much or remember as much as that person, because that person is an expert. Well, what happens is that that person connects information that he or she already has. So again, learning is making connections. So the more connections I make, the more prior knowledge I have, the more mental or workspace I will have to learn and to add new information.
And it really provides a vehicle whereby we can, perhaps by way of analogy, build on prior knowledge, as Silvana suggested, and the more prior knowledge we have, the more likely it is we can build both present and future knowledge.
So working memory is necessary for everything, in order for information be stored in long-term memory, episodic memory, semantic memory. I have to have working memory in order for me to be able to do certain tasks, like even reward and punishment. They're all connected to working memories, that cause and consequence. Driving, for example, is one example that is here. It requires working memory. I have to know what I've learned about driving in order for me to be able to drive right now. I know driving, as like reading, become automatic skills, so that it leaves some capacity, some space for working memory to pay attention to other things. But the big message here is that working memory is necessary for everything we do and for all storage of information.
And some skills, fortunately, enter into a level of automaticity that requires less thought and less attention. Perhaps some of you learn to drive a stick shift and were puzzled at first looking down at the floor. You see 3 pedals and you know darn well that you only have 2 feet. So it takes a little getting used to in terms of working the clutch, working the brake, and working the accelerator. And now, unless you're on a very, very steep hill, you probably give very, very little thought to the process of engaging the clutch and shifting gears. The same holds when we think about driving to work each day. We follow the same route, and sometimes to the extent that we somewhat absent-mindedly end up on a Saturday morning driving the same route and end up close to or actually at our workplace because it has become such an automatic response.
And as we said previously, working memory is that memory that works between the present and the future. The present and the past. The present and the past, so that we can have the information for the planning, the goals that we need to achieve in the future. And that translating to academics, for example, if you're writing, you have your assignment, which is your present. You have to pull information, retrieve information from your past, what you have learned about that subject and about writing. And then the future is going to be to write about something. So writing or composing is one of the skills that really requires working memory. And if that working memory has deficits or has problems, then the child is not going to be able to write a good composition. The same thing goes to comprehension. Comprehension requires prior knowledge, and so working memory does that. Gets what is in the past to decipher, to comprehend, to understand what is in the text in the present.
Working memory, as Silvana suggested, is a space comparable to the desktop on your computer. And it allows you to place temporarily, but not necessarily for a very short period of time, information. And it remains active until the task that you've undertaken is completed or in some way interrupted. You can think about asking directions, and you can think about retrieving a telephone number from an information service, because you need to use that information for a very short period of time until after you've dialed the number that information has provided for you.
Capacity of working memory, that's one of the things as teachers we really have to think about it, because working memory has a small capacity. We can only hold in memory 5 to 7 pieces of information. Well, if I give a lot of information at one time to a child, and is more than 7, more than 5, depending on the age, then of course that child is not learning because working memory is too full. He cannot manipulate any information. So that's why we need to teach kids strategies to chunk information, to categorize information so that there will be more space in working memory. For example, if I give you numbers like 0, 1, 8, 5, 8, 1, 6, 9, 3, you have 9 pieces of information, so it's too much. However, if you chunk those numbers that I gave you in 3s or 2s or 4s, depending on how you want to chunk them, then you have, instead of having 9 pieces of information, you're going to have 3 pieces or 4 pieces of information. So you still have room for some more information. So that's the value of chunking. We can chunk information for students too by, not provide, categorize, providing things in sequence and not giving too much information at once.
And I think, recall how you remember telephone numbers. The numbers are broken down and chunked according to area code, then 3 numbers, and then 4 numbers. Think also about how you retrieve your Social Security number, because that too is very often a matter of chunking, putting digits into your Social Security number into 3 different chunks. I don't know if there are very many of you out there that struggle with one of the same problems that I have. If I'm in an unfamiliar area and I ask for directions, I struggle to remember the directions, and I guess that's probably more of a male problem than the female problem, but perhaps it's because I'm not paying enough attention. And recall we talked about working memory going hand in hand with attention, and that the two are necessary for any learning to occur.
Short-term memory and forgetting, or we also could say working memory and forgetting, but starts with what we call interference, which is, for example, interference, any noise, not necessarily visual stimuli, but noise stimuli will interfere with the student, with the attention, and that is going to cause forgetting. Because if the child cannot hold the information for at least a few minutes, a minute, then the information is going to be gone. And so, when someone is talking, for example, if there is noise around it, for example, so there is interference, so that it might cause forgetting if your attention goes someplace else.
And we've mentioned previously that short-term memory has a relatively limited capacity, and also suggested to you that the capacity can be further diminished if a student struggles trying to separate out relevant from irrelevant stimuli. Going back to my example of directions, perhaps I'm late in getting to where it was that my destination was going to take me, and I was anxious and nervous about getting there much later, and that too might interfere with my ability to attend and therefore submit something to short-term memory.
The other aspect that may cause forgetting is the fact that we sometimes do not follow a sequence instruction. That's why it's so important that we use sequential instruction. Now, besides sequential instruction, I'll give an example here that I have with the vowels. For example, it's recommended that we teach the vowels, the short vowels as A, then O, then I, O, and U. And E being the last and A being the first, because they're similar. if we don't follow this sequence and teach the short A and the short E together, or very close, then the students are going to be confused and they're going to forget the information.
And one of the things that we also discussed in our paper is the fact that learning is typically maximized during the first period of instruction and the final period of instruction. So if you break instruction down into 3 parts, very often students begin to wander in terms of their mind and paying attention during the middle segment of a lesson. So it's important to lay the groundwork and that foundation that we talked about, and then to complete a lesson on a high note with a summary of what has been covered, the usefulness of that information, and where it is going to be applicable to students in their real lives.
Just rephrasing what we said earlier, that working memory, it's temporary storage. It allows us to manipulate information in order for us to do certain types of tasks. And we talked about comprehension, we talked about writing and learning, and of course reasoning. I can see, look at causes and consequences through working memory by, retrieving what happened in the past in order for me to know, to preview the future.
And just by way, again, of restating what we've already covered, we know that the goal is to manipulate information, to hold it long enough for it to become part of our long-term memory. And in so doing, we have the opportunity to retrieve that information at any future date. At least in principle, once information is placed in long-term memory, and to the extent that we have developed strategies, retrieval strategies. For example, some people might go through the letters of the alphabet in their mind. Others might think about colors. Many people have different kinds of retrieval strategies, but they all are predicated on the fact that once information is placed into long-term memory, it will be accessible.
Working memory, as you saw, the importance of working memory is a predictor of achievement in school. It correlates, as it says, with overall intelligence and grades, and also, it correlates very well with the ability to be able to be fluent. And that you might ask, why? Well, because for you to be fluent, for example, in reading, fluency in reading, you have to be able to pull quickly the information from long-term memory to be able to decode what you see in front of you. So fluency, reading comprehension, reasoning, note-taking, composing, those are all skills that are very well correlated with working memory.
Now, what are the implications then with regard to practice? There are a number of implications, as we've suggested, all of which teachers should be aware of, as well as being aware of the differences that exist among their students. We'll share with you shortly and briefly 3 different case studies that illustrate the fact that no 2 students necessarily are going to present the exact same problems, nor in turn are those students going to benefit from the same solutions.
So some implications for practice, we have the word list concept. The longer the word, the longer the information, the more difficult it will be for the student to remember. So be able to provide the information, but summarize the information is important for the students to leave the classroom, and that's why closing a lesson is so important with what did we learn today. So having that summary is very important. The second thing is meaning and memory come together. If something means something to me, then I'm going to remember better than if it doesn't. So it's up to us to make that connection for the students because they don't know how yet of meaning, providing meaning. Why do I need to learn this? Or connect with prior knowledge so that they're able to remember the information because it makes sense. It has a meaning to them.
There are other related skills that facilitate that process. For example, if a student is reading a lengthy passage which contains a great deal of detail and specificity, they may slow down the reading process and they may go back and revisit the content, whereas reading a short passage with relatively little difficulty and very, very few sets of information, then students typically go forward and don't really need to slow down, and they don't really need to go back over the material.
Decay, you know, if we don't use that information, we're going to forget. The information is going to decay because the information is not fresh. So the importance of reviewing information is important. We've been already more than 20 minutes, so we're just going to go quickly through this. The importance of the appropriate sequence we already talked about, remembering capacity, and the need to make certain skills automatic. Bob already explained the recency and the theory effect, and the importance of rehearsal and coding, you know, in doing short-term memory in order for that information to stay there long enough to go to working memory, so working memory can work that information and store it in long-term memory.
And with rehearsal, many of us would recall preparing for an examination and using note cards where there was visual information that we visited repeatedly until we moved it from short-term to long-term memory. And the coding process is how we get there. It is how we transform information into something that is meaningful and something that is manipulable and something that we in turn can move from short-term to working memory to long-term memory.
Okay, we're going to stop right here and try to answer some of your questions.
Okay, so Vicky has asked that. Sorry.
Okay,
I was going to try that again. Sorry. Vicky asked. She said that. Okay, Vicky asked this question. She said, "We use Brain Gym at our school and have a Brain Gym teacher on staff. Have you any experience with Brain Gym, and what do you think of it?"
Hello, Sylvan and Bob, this is Bobby here. Okay, there we go. Okay, sorry, we're trying.
That's what's fine.
Sylvan and Bob, this is Bobby. Sorry, we had some problems with audio, folks. Thank you for hanging in there. The question was about the use of Brain Gym, which, if I'm not mistaken, is a commercial product that people are using. And the question was, do you have any experience or insight into Brain Gym?
No, we don't. I know, like the example that I gave you, this friend has used, I know you, some of the games that's very similar to Brain Gym that is up on the web, and it has helped, but I personally do not have any experience with them.
Okay, the next question is there a way to improve working memory if it's connected to intelligence and also grades, I think you said? Is there a way to challenge it and improve a student's working memory?
There are a number of different strategies that we've enumerated in the article itself, and the answer is a qualified yes. And we would go back and reiterate that it is correlational, not causal interactive. In other words, there is a correlation there between working memory and intelligence. And indeed, we can improve a student's ability to use working memory, and we can, in fact, improve a student's ability to attend, remembering that working memory and attention were both prerequisite to learning. We would refer you to a series of activities that we've outlined during the second part of the paper that we wrote, and I think there are a number of examples there, each of which is based on empirical research, and many of which are designed specifically to strengthen a student's working memory and to improve their capacity for manipulating and storing information, and in fact for retrieving it as well.
Okay, and finally, how do you separate knowing if there is an attention difficulty or a working memory difficulty?
Well, attention difficulty and working memory difficulty, they come kind of together. It's hard to separate, but you can, for example, if you know that the student, if you, for example, in the environment, there's a lot of noise, because noise is one of the things that interfere with learning, with attention. So if there is a problem with attention, then it's going to affect working memory. Sometimes you can see the child is paying attention, but the working memory capacity is small. But they really come hand in hand. It's very difficult. If you read about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and read Barkley, for example, you see that Barkley talks about that ADHD is an inhibition disorder. That means the ability to regulate your attention that affects your working memory. And so he talks about the different types of working memory that are affected by attention deficit disorder. So, if a youngster struggles manipulating and controlling their attention, then they subsequently are going to have difficulty filtering out and dealing with the various interferences. Silvana suggested that noise might be a variable that exists within the classroom environment that is difficult for some students to filter out. There might be other distractions. There may be a student who is preoccupied with looking forward to the end of the school day and going out on the playground and playing baseball with his or her friends. And that too can be a difficult situation for a student, particularly a student who has problems regulating their attention. So I would say that if a child has difficulty with attention, that child is definitely going to have difficulty with working memory, because it's going to forget things, because the information was not filtered, it was not oriented, there was no encoding there.
And recall that short-term memory is essential, and if a student struggles with retaining information in short-term memory to move it into working memory, then there can be an awful lot of slippage, an awful lot of information that is lost long before a student has the opportunity to move it into long-term memory. And very often we see a student kind of spinning their proverbial wheels, struggling with trying to use short-term memory to grasp and to hold information long enough to put it into some meaningful context and then move it from working memory into long-term memory.
Thank you, Bob and Sylvan, for those responses. We did get a message here that BrainGym, in fact, is not a commercial product, but rather comes from Kinesiology Foundation. So we want to thank Sally for correcting us on that. We do have another question here that relates to our last web conference, which looked at the use of technology to differentiate instruction. And in this question, the focus is on the fact that a lot of our learners today have been called digital natives because they've grown up with technology. And one of the characteristics, according to a number of researchers, of young digital natives today is that they like to multitask, or as some of the research calls it, task switching. Can you talk a little bit, Bob and Sylvana, about the propensity to want to multitask and task switching, and how that impacts either positively or negatively working memory?
I think that's an excellent point, and the use of technology certainly has prompted and grown the number of students who indeed do multitask. There is some literature having to do with students from culturally diverse backgrounds that also suggests that multitasking is endemic to certain cultures, more so than other cultures. And in some cases, students are actually more successful learners when they are, in fact, juggling information and multitasking.
Because if you think about what we said, the amount of information, so if they focus on something for a small period of time and then they switch to something else, my culture, it's one of those that multitask. And if I'm not doing 3 or 4 things about the same time, I don't know what I'm doing.
we know students who would be talking on their cell phone, working on their computer, and chatting with friends. And at first it might appear to be a distraction, and it might also appear to be rude, but in many instances that is the culture in which they have grown up, and the context in which they operate most comfortably.
Now, one point I want to make, those tasks cannot be done at the very same time if they're cognitive tasks, because we can only do one cognitive thing at a time. If talking to the phone, I'm just listening to somebody, and there's nothing that I have to think about it, and whatever I'm typing is nothing that I can really think about it, I mean, it's okay. But if I really am trying to concentrate, take a test, and talk on the phone at the same time, is impossible, because they're 2 different tasks. But when we're doing things that are not necessarily cognitive, require a lot of cognition, then we can do more than one. And the other multitask, because multitask has many different connotations. For example, when I'm talking about multitasking, I'm not talking about doing all of them at the very same time, but I have it, this period I'm working several things, but I work on this, work on that, and so there's chunks of time. Does that make sense? So it's the thing about talking on the phone and driving, for example. Well, as long as driving is going to work and you know your way and there's nothing cognitively there for you to pay attention, then you can do both. But when driving requires your attention, then you need to pay attention. You can only do one cognitive thing at a time.
And we do envy some younger learners, because us old folks, and I'm speaking just for myself now, have difficulty doing one task well and concentrating and paying sufficient attention, much less two or three. But what Silvana is suggesting is that the switching and the jumping from one task to another instantaneously rather than simultaneously.
Any other questions? So did we answer the question?
Yes, thank you. That's great. Bob and Silvana, I think we have time. We don't have any more questions at the moment, but we do have about 10 minutes left, and we could take a look at one of the case studies this afternoon.
We have 3 case studies that we've drawn from some of the information that was included in the article that we wrote. And here is the first of those 3 case studies. There are a series of bulleted points that describe this particular young lady. And she loves science and math, works hard on her assignments. However, she often asks her teacher for extra time. She seems highly motivated to learn. She participates in class discussions and makes, by and large, some excellent contributions. What is troubling to her teachers is the fact that she is slow in completing written assignments, and her work is sometimes marred by the fact that there are problems with pronunciation or with marks of punctuation and misspellings. Now, the latter kinds of problems have raised the question in her teacher's mind whether this is a problem that is related to attention or not. So the question becomes, what is Stacy's problem? Is her problem a learning difficulty or producing difficulty?
And, well, Stacy has phonological processing problem, which is not, it's not a attention problem, it's not a working memory problem, because phonological processing is going to include the short-term memory for phonological memory, and it would affect her decoding spelling skills, so that means that she has a learning difficulty, not a producing difficulty, because she wants to do it, but it takes her a long time to read, to decode the words, to spell, to answer the questions, because of her decoding and spelling ability. So what steps should be done? You have to think about a student who cannot read, he cannot spell. So first of all, her books should be on tape. I mean, not that I'm saying that she should not be taught how to read. She should be taught how to read, but for science, social studies, all these other textbooks should be on tape so that she can get the information faster. She can benefit from oral test exams or multiple choice tests. Because but she'll need somebody to read it to her, so she won't spend so much time thinking about it, decoding, because remember, you cannot do 2 cognitive things at a time. So if she's going to spend too much time decoding, she's not going to comprehend. And that's why people think that dyslexia affects comprehension, but it really is because we can't do 2 cognitive things at the same time. Visual imagery benefits everyone. Keyword method is also another way of developing vocabulary, and not only for vocabulary semantic itself, but also for fluency. Semantic map also helps the building of their vocabulary. Using I refer back to the text where the article where we show the picture and the information written inside the picture instead of on the side, so that you can, if you can't read very well, you can read it in the context. And use of graphic organizers to summarize information, as we said, because it demands less reading, and it's easier to remember shorter information than long information.
And just as an aside, graphic organizers are not limited just to their use in academics. Graphic organizers can be a very, very useful tool for promoting social skills and accomplishing the same thing, namely making information more accessible and in simpler forms allow students to grasp onto the concepts and make it more meaningful, and again put it into their long-term memory.
So they have any questions, because we don't have any more time.
I think we're just about out of time. I would encourage you to do several things, one of which is to look at the case studies and go through, as Silvana and I have done, go through the case studies and then perhaps refer back to the article itself, because we've expanded on the problems evidenced by these three students in these three case studies, and we've also provided at the end of our article a number of different strategies that have been proven effective for promoting both working memory and attention among students with various types of learning or producing or learning disability related problems.
Okay, Bob and Silvana, we thank you so much for this, and it occurred to us here in Chapel Hill that what we can do, you mentioned the case studies, and looking through those and referring back to the article and the strategies you wrote, what we'll do is we'll take the case study we just saw with Stacy, and then this case study with Bill, and then the third case study, we'll put those into a PDF document and make them available in the same place where we make the archive available for today's web conference. So I think that's an excellent suggestion and a nice way to extend and to continue to think more and deepen our understanding, perhaps taking from working memory, short-term memory, and putting into long-term memory our understanding of how we can use knowledge of student cognition to differentiate instruction. So with that being said, I'd like to ask everyone in the room this afternoon to join us in a virtual round of applause, and to thank Dr. Robert Gable and Dr. Silvana Watson from Old Dominion University. We really appreciate this thoughtful presentation this afternoon on a topic that impacts all educators, no matter whether or not you have students who have different learning disabilities or not. I believe this kind of information is extremely important for us. Before we finish our session this afternoon, want to remind you of some upcoming web conferences. On the 18th, is that right, Leslie? The 18th, April the 18th, will be a national web conference, the same time from 3:30 to 5, and this will actually be a repeat of an earlier web conference this year on deaf learners in the mainstream classroom. Again, that will be featuring Dean Emeritus Dr. David Martin, as well as Professor Mary Compton at UNC Greensboro, and teacher of the deaf Kathy Metzer in Guilford County Schools. We'll be using the same room, the same link for that. That's April the 18th from 3:30 until 5 o'clock, so a little bit longer. This is a national web conference, and we have around 300 people from around the U.S., Canada, and Australia signed up for that. The final web conference in this series will take place on April the 26th, and that is a Tuesday. That's a change of date. At the same time, however, April the 26th, and we will post the article soon, sometime later this week for that particular web conference. So that will be the final web conference of our series. Again, many thanks to Dr. Robert Gagel, Dr. Savannah Watson. We're going to stop the recording at this time.